Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Countryside Workshop. I'm Martin Parker. I'm the head of firearms at BASC. Relatively new to this. In fact, this is my first Countryside Workshop. So I doubt there'll be any Oscar nominations just yet, but one can but hope. So this afternoon I'm going to talk a little bit about this document I've got here, which is the Home Office Firearms Licensing Statutory Guidance for Chief Officers of Police. And this document was released last Wednesday, the 20th of October. And what I'm hoping to deal with this afternoon are a few of the misconceptions that are around the document, but also what are the primary implications for you as BASC members, and some of the questions, or trying to answer some of the questions you may have. So the first thing, when it was released, quite a lot of the British press actually said that this document was as a result of the tragic shootings down in Plymouth. In actual fact, the document has been around quite a bit longer, certainly since 2019, and was actually produced as a response to Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary report in 2015. And concerns were expressed then by HMIC as to the inconsistency of the way firearms licensing was applied across the 43 police forces of England and Wales. And so this statutory guidance has been produced to try and improve on that consistency. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, there's been Home Office guidance around on firearms licensing for many years. And that's correct. The last guidance was in 2016. But the key difference is that document, which extends quite an extensive tome to about 270 pages, is only advisory. My background as a forensic scientist, I've been several times in court where judges have made it very clear that Home Office guidance is just that. It's Home Office guidance. It has no standing in law. Whereas with this statutory guidance, it does. So does that mean it compels chief officers to follow it to the letter? No, it doesn't. But what it does say quite clearly in the guidance is that if a chief officer departs from this guidance, they have to justify why they have departed from it on a case-by-case basis. So it is a much better document in terms of ensuring that consistency. When the document was put together, there was a consultation exercise, and BASC were consulted along with the other shooting organisations, in particular the British Shooting Sports Council. And we worked with those organisations in order to remove certain elements which we felt were disproportionate, or to modify elements that we thought would not be advantageous to our members or to the shooting community in general. So I think we are a lot happier with the document that has been produced. Nevertheless, there are still one or two issues where we still have concerns, and I'll deal with that as we go through. So what's the main thrust of the document? What's perhaps the most important thing that's going to happen as a result of this statutory guidance? And I should say this, although it was released on the 20th of October, it becomes law next Monday, and hence this is a very timely piece. And the main issue, I would say, which comes out of it is what's called medical verification. Now, some of you in forces, such as Lincolnshire, for example, I think they were one of the first forces, have been subject to medical verification, compulsory medical verification, since 2018. The key difference is that the Home Office guidance originally was you completed your application for a shotgun or firearm certificate, and you completed a medical form which asked you whether you had suffered with certain medical conditions. That form was then supposed to be verified by your GP. If the force didn't hear within 21 days, they would assume there was no problem, but that risk was then carried by the force. The fundamental difference with this document, and when it goes live next week, is all 43 forces must have a medical verification letter, either from your GP or from another registered medical practitioner to say that the document that you have filled in dealing with medical conditions that you may suffer with is an accurate portrayal of your medical history. That then begs the obvious question. Well, what happens if my GP doesn't want to partake in this process, doesn't want to actually verify it? And there are cases where GPs, so-called conscientious objectors, who don't agree with shooting, will not be part of the process. The other problem some people have had with medical verification is that GPs can charge for that process. And while some don't charge at all, and some charge a fairly nominal fee, 10, 20, 30 pounds, the worst case we're aware of at BASC is a charge of £365, which does seem to be rather exorbitant. So if you encounter either of these problems, if your GP is a conscientious objector and doesn't want to be involved, or if you think that the fee you're being charged is exorbitant, then you can come to what's called the BASC Medical Panel. Now, this is only open to members, and it was set up by inviting registered medical practitioners who were members of BASC, who offered their services kindly for the benefit of other members. And they can review your GP medical records. They obviously have to review those records, and they will then carry out that verification process. There is a charge for that. It is £50, and that is very reasonable compared with what a lot of other doctors are wanting to charge. So to say, it is a membership benefit. There will be a link on that. So we would encourage members who are encountering any issues to actually utilise that. That said, there are some people who will quite happily pay more than that. There may be, if you have a very good relationship with your GP, it can get done quicker. You don't have to go through any other processes and be quite happy to do that. I actually had a letter from a gentleman recently who said that he'd been charged £90 by his GP to produce that. And he said, I think that's probably quite a lot. But he said, I looked at it, it's £18 a year for the duration of the certificate, and I don't necessarily think that's an exorbitant amount. So it depends how you look at that. Do we at BASC support the medical verification? Well, I think you have to say that there are certain medical conditions where it is not appropriate for people to have access to firearms if they have those medical conditions. So yes, we do support it. The one area we have reservations about is what is called medical markers. Now again, in the statutory guidance document, what it says is if you are granted a shotgun certificate or a firearms certificate, it is the Firearms Licensing Department's statutory, or they're compelled to do it, to actually allow, to inform your GP that you have been granted a certificate. What is then supposed to happen is for your GP to put that marker on your medical records, so that if you develop any medical condition which would cause concern with you holding firearms, they can inform your firearms licensing authority. What the document actually says is that it's best efforts. It doesn't compel the GP to actually put that marker on. And BASC feels that if you don't actually compel that marker to be put on, you're just getting a snapshot of an individual's medical history. And over the last 20 years, there have been a number of tragic incidents where people, typically with mental health issues that have developed, have either taken their own lives or taken other people's lives. And so we think that marker is an essential part of the process. Otherwise, you're just getting the snapshot of that person's medical history at the time they apply for the certificate. Now, what some people have said is, well, if you have that marker on your certificate, does that not deter people from going to see their GP, particularly if they were, for example, suffering from depression or stress? And I think, again, it's incumbent on us to say, if you are suffering from any medical condition where you should consult your GP, you must go to see your GP. That has got to be the best advice. And I think it's worth stressing that there are many medical conditions certainly around mental health issues, which are entirely treatable, be it by what's called cognitive behavioural therapy or with certain drugs. But do go and see your GP, talk through it with your GP, and you will certainly find that your GP is pretty understanding on these things. Some people say, well, what if my GP doesn't want me to have a gun? Well, it's not up to your GP whether you have a gun or not. Your GP informs your firearms licensing authority. But ultimately, whether you are a fit and proper person to have a firearm, and whether you can have that firearm and not be a danger to the public, is the responsibility of the Chief Constable of your force. It is not the responsibility of your GP. So your GP does not have a veto on you getting a firearm certificate or a shotgun certificate. So I think those are the main medical issues, but are there any other concerns that people have had with the introduction of this statutory guidance? An obvious one is, well, when it comes in on Monday, will it lead to delays? And we already have delays, perhaps not surprisingly, with the COVID pandemic that we've experienced. And a number of firearms licensing departments are operating with backlogs, some over 6 months. It is possible that it will lead to delays as the process beds in. There are likely, I guess, to be teething problems as there are with anything. But I think these will be sorted out fairly quickly. And quite a lot of forces do have experience of the actual process and can speak to other forces. So I'm not anticipating that this is going to be a major problem. But as ever, those of you who are members of BASC, if you do have any issues with the licensing authorities, we are always here to help. When I started as head of firearms just 6 months ago now, my primary objective, as I saw it, was to develop the best possible relationships with police firearms licensing departments, because I think it's through those good relationships with those departments that we can actually act on your behalf, and we'll always try and act on your behalf in your best interests. What other things have come up? Other concerns? Social media is one which really has pushed a few people's buttons, so to speak. And there are people who are saying, oh, well, the statutory guidance means that the police will now be talking to my neighbours to see whether I'm an appropriate person to have a firearm. Well, I can assure you that although that was in the original consultation document, there is now no plan or no authority to actually speak to neighbours. But police forces can do quite extensive background checks. They can look at your social media accounts. They can look at your habits, such as drinking and things like that. And some people are concerned about that, but police firearms licence departments have always been able to do those sort of background checks. And those extensive background checks are really there for if the police, after doing their initial checks, start to find reasons that they may have concerns about whether someone should be issued with a firearm. What do you do about social media? Well, I think the advice has always been, with regard to social media, never ever put anything on social media that you are not fully prepared to stand behind in a public arena. It's very easy to put things on social media which perhaps when you think through afterwards you wish you hadn't, so that's the advice. But really, if you put things on social media which lead the police to conclude that you are not a fit and proper person to have a firearm, you only have yourself to blame. So when you're putting stuff on social media, particularly relating to anything to do with shooting, just stop and think whether it's appropriate. Okay, I think that's probably all the key points that I wanted to embark on. I'm not sure, I'm just looking across at my colleague to see whether there are any sort of questions. But I think just rounding it up, as I say, this does come in to operation next Monday. If you have any issues at all with regard to this, particularly I think on the medical verification side, then please do get in touch with us at BASC. But really, any sort of firearms licensing problems, this is one of the benefits of your membership. Please do get in touch with us, and we will deal with those as best as we possibly can. Thank you very much for listening.